Well, good morning. My name is Mike Souder, and I love being one of your pastors. One of the things I love the most about being a pastor is getting to hear the stories of what God is doing in this house with all of you. Monday night this week we had our usual 3-hour elders meeting, which went late, not because of the agenda, although it was a big agenda. The meeting went late because we got telling these stories, and they just kept going and going and going. True stories of these amazing things that God's doing around here. I just want to tell a few of those. First of all, David and Brenda Cox, missionary friends of ours from England, are preparing to move to Virginia to launch Bethel USA. Thank God, which we need a Bethel here. Since January, they've been looking for a house for their family with no luck, nothing even close. So last week, they go ahead and buy their plane tickets to come to the U.S. in July, still not having a house. 2 days later, after they buy their plane tickets, Merle Shank, our pastor, is talking with another friend of his, a pastor friend who just happens to have a house currently being renovated in the exact location they want, available the exact week they arrive in Virginia. And I kid you not, for the exact amount for a full year that they have fundraised for. It's like, you just can't make this stuff up. Tom Watson, an elder here at Grace, experienced what he called a trifecta of 3 things happening on the same day. He gets this medical report, which is way better than he expected. His sister is healed in a profound way, and his daughter gets the 7th house that she's tried for in a row in Chantilly, when all the realtors say you might as well give up, all in the same day. Larry Combs saw a vision of his wife Gloria the morning after she died, ascending to heaven in the arms of an angel and holding on super tight because she's afraid of heights. Their son, Tony, the same day, has a vision of his mother riding a horse at breakneck speed, and since has a couple other dreams about her. Now these 2 guys, if you know them, they're not like given to visions and dreams. They're not like that kind, like I have dreams, but these guys are like, anyway, they serve to be massive. They're massively encouraged by this stuff. Dot Sensabaugh, one of my new heroes, gets into a conversation with her repairman when he comes to her house to pick up his check. Since the work is done, she tells him this is probably the last time she'll see him, and she wants to be sure that he knows Jesus. So she asks him point blank if he's at peace with God. He bursts into tears, and she leads him to Christ right there in her front step. Dot is 89 years old. And this has just happened in the last couple weeks. In December, I invited someone to join our staff to do one of the things I've been doing here at Grace, to lead small groups. And it just didn't seem like the right fit for this person. This is in December. So we've talked about it a little bit here and there, but really hardly any. 2 weeks ago, in the middle of church, I get this text from this person, and I quote, "I'm in, man. I want to help the church in any way I can, bringing more people to know the love of Jesus." He texts me this while Dick Blackwell is preaching about the simple importance of obedience. And one more. Last week, a couple on their way out of town, we were the last stop on their way out of town. This couple stops in here, hands me a card. I open the card, and it's like, you ever open a card and there's like a check in it, and you're like, pretend not to look at the check while you look at the thing. Anyway, the card is like, thank you, the church has been great, we're going to miss you all. And the check is for $24,000, made to Grace Covenant, $24,000. They want to tithe on their house. I mean, the stories which I've just told you, they show just a little picture, just a slice of what's happening at Grace Covenant in the span of a couple weeks. They show the range of God's activity. And they inspire us to follow him more intimately, more closely, I would say more aggressively. We need more of these. We need a lot more of these. We need to fill that frame full so you can't see any paint on it, on the wall. We need all the help we can believing God, because believing God, can we just admit, it's just not easy. We doubt God. We have a very hard time trusting God. And I'm at least encouraged to know we're not the first few people to experience that. You read the Bible, and it's full of that. Thomas, who walks with Jesus for a couple years, has a hard time believing Jesus. And instead of shaming him, Jesus is so compassionate. He'll keep going, whatever he's got to do to help people believe. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're having a hard time trusting or believing God, just stay with God's people. That's what Thomas did. That's a whole other sermon. But the one thing Thomas got right, he just stayed with God's people until eventually he could encounter Jesus. We need this encouragement. Thursday, I spend more or less the whole day reading and working on this sermon. And on the way home, I'm talking to someone about some difficult situation. And before I even know it, the words come out of my mouth, well, that will be a miracle. You know, just kind of that casual, dismissive nature of miracles. As if miracles are as impossible as unicorns or Bigfoot or something. Are you with me? I mean, is there not tension here? Like, we know we're supposed to believe this. And once in a while, we do. We really do. But a lot of the time, we live over here. One way to build our faith is to live in constant reflection of what God has done. That's really critically important, because living with the phone in front of our face more or less anything, which gratifies our instantaneous need for everything and the future, sense of the future. We need this reflection on what God has done, where he has shown up, as well as recently. So today is week 2 in our summer sermon series entitled Arise, and we're looking at the rise of the people of Israel, led at this point by a man named Joshua. By way of super fast review, around the year 2000 BC, God picked a couple in their 70s named Abraham and Sarah to start a new group of people called the Israelites, and they would live in this place called Canaan. 500 years later, a man named Moses brings them to the border. Do we have this? So this is a terrible map I made. But anyway, just to give you a reminder, this is the Mediterranean Sea. Here's Turkey. Here's Egypt. Here's Iraq. This is modern-day Israel. And Moses brings them to this spot right here along the Jordan River. In Joshua chapter 1, Moses died, and Joshua takes over. In Joshua chapter 2, a couple of men are sent up to this land of Canaan from here, cross the Jordan River, which is here, over to Jericho, which is here. A couple spies are sent over here to check things out, to prepare for their mission. The next day they return back, and they tell Joshua, we're good to go. But first, Joshua says, we're going to have to cross this river with a couple million people without boats. This should be fun. So this is where we pick up in chapter 3 of Joshua. Chapter 3, verse 1. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan River, where they camped before crossing over. Verse 10, Joshua tells them this, that is what you're about to experience, is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will drive out before you the Canaanites and all the other ites. Verse 14, when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark was this gold box filled with the 10 Commandments and some manna and these other things of significance. The Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage, all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan, and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Interestingly enough, this is the exact location where Jesus was baptized. I find that fascinating in and of itself. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completely crossed on dry ground. Joshua at this point sends 12 guys back into the river to collect some stones to bring out to set up a memorial. And then continuing here in verse 17, Joshua then commanded the priests come up out of the Jordan. And the priests, last ones out, first ones in, last ones out, came up out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on the dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. Verse 20, and Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. And he said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? What's the point of this faith of yours? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. The Jordan River at this location is about 100 feet wide and 10 feet deep. I read a few essays and articles about this whole thing, and one article I read estimated that given the geography of the site, the river, the land, given the duration it would have taken this huge group of people to cross, the body of water that would have accumulated upriver would have been 20 miles long, 2 miles wide, and around 120 feet. We're not talking about walking through Black's Run over here or something. So, I mean, I'm reading this in my head. I'm like, I have all these questions. First of all, why did there need to be a river? And why did it have to be at flood stage? And why did it have to be bone dry when they crossed it? And why did God have to repeat a miracle he had already done with the Red Sea? What is the purpose of all this? What is the purpose of miracles? Well, for one, miracles, the activity of God, encourages God's people. As we just read from Joshua, God did this so that all the people of the earth would know the power of God, and so that you would live with constant fear, respect, awe of God. God performs miracles. He does physical things. He does things in front of us, around us, so that we wouldn't know him just intellectually through a book, but we would experience his power. Miracles and the activity of God causes us to live with a sense of awe, to live in awe and respect. And the result of that isn't fear and some kind of mediocre lives. If you live in fear and awe of God, you live with incredible courage and peace for whatever's in front of you. You don't have to fear anything. You fear God, you don't fear anything else. They encourage us. If God did that, God can do this. If he did it for them, maybe he can do it for me. I think that's a Maverick City song. Miracles encourage God's people. They also discourage God's enemies. Just before the Israelites crossed the river, remember I told you they crossed, just before they all crossed, a couple people crossed and went over into Jericho to check things out. And of all people, God directed those two spies to Rahab, the baker, right? No, it's not. Rahab, the businesswoman, Rahab, the scripture says, was a prostitute, which I can't get off on that, but I would just remind you, she was the great-grandmother of King David and the great to the 25th power great-grandmother of Jesus Christ. Let that soak in for a second. Anyway, Rahab tells them, listen, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and a great fear of you has fallen on us. When we heard of what your God did, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. The things that God does, they don't just encourage us. They don't just encourage us as God's people. They discourage the enemy. Miracles push back physical enemies, and they push back spiritual enemies. Apathy, fear, doubt. The activity of God pushes that stuff back. Every morning you wake up, the enemy is right there to try to intimidate you. You know what might happen today. You know what that's about. You know what they might do to you. Every minute of every day, the enemy is trying to intimidate us with the what could happen. And we turn that attack around. We resist the enemy by remembering and by reminding him what God has done and what God has promised to do. So miracles and the activity of God discourages God's enemies. Miracles also serve to strengthen our unique collective identity as God's people. Apart from God, people are lost. They're lost because their identity is in some kind of constant fluid change. Their identity, who they are, is subject to time and space and circumstance. Whatever a person is feeling or thinking at that moment, that's who they are. That's their identity. Christians, on the other hand, have a fixed and permanent identity, just like we have a fixed and permanent gender. We are the sons and daughters of God, and that gives us a solid place to stand in this world. It gives us an identity that's marked by being daughters and sons of God. It gives us this opportunity to be identified by relationship with God and relationship with all the other daughters and sons. And miracles, the acts of God, have this way of reinforcing that identity, helping us remember who we are. They remind us who we are. They give us stories to tell our children. When I was 1 year old, you say year or years? 1 year old. Year. I was a toddler, and my dad's brother was shot and killed on our property in a hunting accident by someone who was trespassing. I've told this story before. So I was a year old. I don't remember this, but I'll never forget, and I will repeat this story as much as I have the opportunity to. The same night, my dad had to show up to the local sheriff's office with this guy who was trespassing, killed his one brother, died in my dad's arms. And my dad goes up to the guy. Well, first he goes to the sheriff and said, I want you to drop all the charges. And then he goes to the guy and says, you're forgiven. I don't want this to hang over your life. I completely forgive you. That kind of story does something to a family legacy. My children will repeat that story. Their children will repeat that story. It's a part of who we are. Miracles strengthen our identity as God's people. And finally, maybe the ultimate purpose, miracles increase God's reputation and the reach of his kingdom, as if he needed anything to do that, but that's what he does. Miracles, the acts of God, are these supernatural signs that point to God. They point us to God. They prove his power. They prove his authority over every other authority. They prove his capacity to bend time, weather, human genes. He can do whatever he wants. They prove, as Isaiah prophesied, the ever-expanding, never-ending nature of his kingdom. So Joshua and all these people, if you read through the Old Testament, Joshua and the Hebrew people took stones and they built altars. That was a very common thing to do. But the Apostle Peter, who spent time with Jesus, said, "We are now living stones." Each of you who are a believer, you are a living stone to remind the people around you, to influence the people around you to believe in the goodness of God. 1 Peter 2, you, every one of you, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house. You are chosen people. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation. You are God's special possession. Who doesn't want to be, isn't that what the world's dying for now, to be seen? You are God's special possession, that you might declare for a purpose, that you would declare the praises of him who called you out of dark into light. Once you were not a people, once you were lost, but now you have an identity. You are the people of God. We're going to watch a video now that captures the life of a woman named Kelly from Bethel in the United Kingdom. Bethel is a church ministry that cares for people holistically. It brings them in, mostly, a lot of times homeless people, brings them in off the street, gives them a place to belong. They come to know Christ. I want you to watch the trajectory of her life as a living stone.
My mum was a sun-up, sun-down alcoholic. She was quite abusive, and I always felt like an outsider rather than her daughter. Every time we moved to a new area, we would be at a new school, we would have a new dog, my mum would have a new partner. Me and my brother, we kind of never really bothered really getting attached to the dog or the school, the friends, even the partners, because we knew that we'd be moving on, like within the year. I think I was about 7. My mum had met a guy called Tomlin. It just seemed to be a pattern of these two fine when they're not drinking, but when they drunk, it was utter chaos. The violence, the screaming. It was so toxic, but they couldn't seem to stay away from each other. And the abuse and the violence just got worse and worse. So my mum said, "That's it, we're moving to Belfast." By this time, I was just turning 9. We were there for a year in Belfast. My mum decides that she's going to get back with Tomlin. So my mum goes. So we were taken into care. My brother was separated from me, and I had become friends with a 14-year-old girl who was really kind. She was really sweet. But then she began to sexually abuse me. I was 10 years old, but I was completely done. I didn't have any care for what happened to me from that moment on. I began taking drugs from the age of 14, any kind of drug that was going to get me to a higher place of escapism. I began a cycle of shoplifting, getting money, drugs, shoplifting, getting money, drugs. By the time I was 16 years old, I'd fallen pregnant with my first child, and I began to do the same thing. Run, have a child, violence, alcohol, drugs, run, have a child, violence, drugs, alcohol. 19th of December 2015, my whole world was rocked. My brother goes missing. The police had CCTV footage of my brother walking towards the cliff tops at 6 p.m. and that is it. My mum had called me. She said, "Why Chad? Why couldn't it have been you?" I got off the phone to my mum, and that was the last time I'd spoke to her. I'd got myself in a real mess. There was a knock on the door, but it was this woman, and she had these bags of shopping. I just remember her smiling at me and saying, "Hey, I've heard that you need some help. Here's some shopping." And she said, I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. And true to her word, she came back every 2 weeks, the 2 whole years, with shopping for me and the family. There was something in her eyes. There was just something about her. I just knew in my heart that this lady had the answer. I sat down with her because I was taking copious amount of drugs. I was dying. I knew I was dying. I was desperate at this point. And I remember saying to her, "Nadia, I need help." And she said to me, "Kelly, have you heard of a place called Battelle? It's a Christian rehab." And then she said, "There's rules." And it was like a light bulb moment. I needed this place. Within a week, I was walking through the doors of Battelle. I've always been scared of the dark. Always been scared of the dark. I would always have to have a light. But I slept, and I slept in the darkness because I felt safe. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. And my first encounter with Jesus, I felt a joy and a love wash over me in that very moment, that radical transformation. I felt it, and I wanted more. I was now embarking on a journey with Jesus. I was picking up the Bible. I was beginning to understand it. Worship, I began to love it. I began to be sat in the back of church, fuming, to jumping for joy at the front of church. I have friends, genuine friends, that I never had before. Within 14 months of being in Battelle, my children came to live with me, and my kids, they love being here. It's taken a time, it's been a journey, but they're settled because mum isn't running anymore. So they can feel safe and themselves. I met my husband Luke in Battelle, and in 2020 we got married in Battelle, and it was a wonderful wedding. Not long after that, Luke's son came to live with us, so we were just complete. we're expecting a child together. So now it's even more complete. God had put it on my heart to forgive my mum. I didn't want to. I didn't know how to, but we would talk once a week. I would send her portions of scripture, and she rang me up one time. She goes, "Kelly, I want to know everything about Jesus." I said, "Sure." So we would speak, and our conversations were just about God and about Jesus and about, how, I'd been saved. And she was like, "Kelly, I want to be saved." She was praying every day, she was telling me. She said that she'd given her life to Christ, and my mum wanted to see me and I wanted to see her. And for the first time, I hugged my mum, and everything had broken in that moment. There was no more pain. The past had gone. In that moment, I felt a love for my mum that could have only have come from the love that I'd received from Jesus. The following year, I had a phone call, and she had suffered a severe heart attack. And it pained me, it really did, because it's like, I lost my mum again. But in reality, I was praising God because I'd got my relationship back with my mum, and the reconciliation, and that we'd got together, the love that I finally yearned for, I'd received. I'm so thankful to Christ. He can really do the impossible in your life, because I never thought that me and my mum would ever talk again. And he'd given us so much more. I think the word that stands out more than any other word, it was a word that was spoken over me so many times. You are damaged goods. And I always felt dirty. Coming to Christ, I felt changed. I felt loved. I wake up and I'm thankful that I didn't die an addict. I'm thankful that I get a second chance to be at peace, to know peace, to be accepted, to be loved, to be secure. I feel good. I feel like a good person. I'm happy.
I met Kelly. I had the chance to meet Kelly and her husband an hour or so after I watched that video for the first time in England. And I'll tell you, they are really as bright as they appear in that video. Their lives are these, we don't use the word monument very often, but their lives are these monuments that just shout the goodness and the power of God. That forgiveness and reconciliation and new life is 100% possible. They're like these street signs that point to God and the goodness of God. I was reading Psalm 77 this week. In my normal Bible reading, I was reading Psalm 77, written by someone in desperate, depressed, deep trouble. Those are the words in there, deep trouble. And in Psalm 77, the author asks God if he even cares anymore. But then he says this, Psalm 77, "Then I thought, to this I will appeal, the years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider. I will choose to focus on all your works. I will meditate. I will chew on. I will think about. I will memorize what you do, your mighty deeds. You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. Whether you're doubting and disbelieving, whether you're full of faith and you have a lot to teach the rest of us, whatever the case, God is looking for ways every single day to show his power and his goodness through you, right in the middle of your mess. I'm going to give you a chance for prayer before we get out of here. You know, we all have times where things are difficult, but sometimes things are worse than others. If you're depressed, disappointed, discouraged, if you're struggling with God, if you are in some kind of deep trouble, like the psalmist we just talked about, it's additionally hard to pursue God. That's why we need each other. I want to give you a chance to stand if that's you. And we're going to gather around you. We're going to have a few people gather around you. And I know that's awkward. I know that the distance between here and here is like 100 miles. But there's something in that act of humility and honesty that really blesses the Lord, and it releases something of his favor over you. Kelly, who we watched the video about, her life was transformed because she was willing to go. She was willing to do something. It's an act of repentance. So, if you need something from God, I want to encourage you right now to stand. Be brave. Stand up where you are. And we're going to pray. Anyone in this house in any kind of trouble? Good. It's good. Can we have a few people gather around these folks, and we're going to pray. Just go ahead and pray, and I'll close this in a minute with that. And if you're still sitting, I just want to encourage you. Ask the Lord to show you his goodness. Where has he been good in your life? Where has he been true to what his promises are? Where has he shown up? Maybe not in the way you expected, but where has he shown up for you?
All my life you have been faithful.
All right, you can keep praying as long as the person being prayed for is kind of driving the show. When they turn around and say thank you, they're done. But you can keep praying as long as you want. I would like to have the ministry team come forward to pray for some people. I'm going to close reading this passage again from 1 Peter 2. You, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house. You're a part of something. You're a chosen people. You're a royal priesthood. You're a holy nation. You are God's very special possession, that you might declare the praises of him who called you. He's called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Come on, y'all. Let's be a bright light to the world around us who is desperate for some good news. Let's be the voice and the face and the kindness and the goodness and the truth of God wherever we go. People are desperate for it. I bless you. Have a wonderful day. Love you all. See you later.